Welcome to the Safety Break, the Whitewater Rescue Podcast. We're here to share stories of real river accidents and rescues and find expert advice on how to solve the problems you might encounter in the Whitewater River environment. I'm your host, Jack Diddy, an emergency medicine physician, whitewater paddler, and wilderness medicine educator. Together, I hope we can celebrate successful rescues and learn from our mistakes in a supportive environment. If you have a story to share of a non-fatal accident or rescue, send me an email at thesafetybreak@gmail.com or contact me on our Facebook page, The Safety Break. If you like what you hear, hit the subscribe button and follow us on social media. I hope you learned something valuable in the show. These are the sounds of recovery in the mountains of western North Carolina. The immediate scramble for rescue operations has waned, and people are starting to piece things together and figure out a way forward. That's not to say that the suffering is over. Cold weather has moved in at night, and there are a lot of people still without running water or even a home, and several of the regional emergency shelters are still at high capacity. In addition to this ongoing struggle for many people, the cleanup of the structural mess looks like an overwhelming task. If you travel through any of the heavily impacted river corridors, you will see extensive infrastructure damage and an immense amount of unrecognizable debris along the riverbanks and hanging high in the trees. Steel cables, various containers of all sorts and sizes, electrical wires, and even railroad tracks are strung around the riverbanks and into the waters in many places. And there are literally millions of large fallen trees across the region, everywhere you look. And along with all of those issues, there is the question of the water itself. What's in it? Bacteria, heavy metals, other chemicals. All told, this is a high-hazard environment for anyone contemplating navigating these rivers, or even driving around near them. In the first few weeks after the storm, there was such a need to help stabilize things that outdoor recreational pursuits were obviously sidelined, and certainly on the rivers, as these were ground zero for the most devastation and personal tragedies. But as time passes, there is also a deep need for normalcy and the return of those things that we love. I think it's safe to assume that for many listeners to this podcast, these rivers are sacred places, and there is a very strong need to get back to them and see firsthand the new landscapes carved by this monumental event. Outdoor recreation is also a huge player in the western North Carolina economy. A study from the Made by Mountains partnership found that outdoor recreation accounts for $4.9 billion in economic output, 48,000 full-time jobs, and $197.5 million in countywide tax revenues across the region. So for many people in the region whose livelihoods depend on it, getting back to the rivers and trails and other outdoor recreational pursuits is more than just for fun. As I record this, Pisgah National Forest has partially reopened. Water is running through the pipes again into many of the homes in Asheville, and people are venturing out into the river environments once again. So how can we do this safely and responsibly? That's the question I'm hoping to answer with this episode of The Safety Break. I have two guests today, both representing nonprofit organizations that have a focus on river advocacy in our region. This is Kevin Colburn from American Whitewater.
I'm the National Stewardship Director of American Whitewater. I live in Asheville, and I do a lot of regional stewardship work here in the Southeast, as well as Northern Rockies and Mid-Atlantic. So I've been here for over 30 years, on and off, paddling. I went to college here, so know the river super well. Done a lot of work with the hydropower dam relicensing in the area, getting flows on rivers and building access areas and all kinds of things like that.
And from Mountain True, we have Anna Alsobrook.
My name's Anna Alsobrook. I am the French Broad Watershed Science and Policy Manager, which is just a mouthful of a way to say I take a lot of water quality samples and nerd out about it. So I've been here for about 10 years and work within the French Broad, specifically in the French Broad Riverkeeper program. And what that basically means is like our role is to make the French Broad a cleaner, better, safer place to swim, recreate, fish, drink. And one of the ways we do that is through advocating for better water quality policies. We also, use our data. If there's pollution coming into the river from some particular source, we work with the tools in our toolbox to get that pollution source fixed. So we have obviously like a big water program, but we have folks that do national forest planning. And then healthy communities is clean energy, clean transportation, affordable housing, that kind of stuff too. So we have a lot of different pots we work in.
Anna and Kevin both described similar scrambles to help fill the needs of our local communities in the initial days after the storm.
Our neighborhood fared really well. So we basically just focused on helping others, kind of first starting with our neighbors and then like moving out kind of in concentric circles from there as the roads opened up. And our house had water. So we were able to host a lot of people to do laundry and showers and fill water jugs. And so it's been interesting. Our neighborhood's kind of been a bit of a refuge for others. So very fortunate.
And it felt like the first week, it was just about tackling whatever was in front of you with whatever you had. So yeah, starting with your own family, your neighbors, your community, and like as you had more capacity, you added more distance to your little circle. Mountain True as an organization, like we've been doing a lot of different stuff that we haven't done before. Like, so we set up in a bunch of different community centers and just cooked food for people. Chainsawing places that needed chainsawing. We, delivered water to places and worked with organizations that had water filtering devices on where best to put those for communities. When we started being able to get out with ease of gas and whatnot, and like starting to take water samples, starting to take visual assessments of the river corridors.
As we all ventured out after the first few days and saw some of these river corridors firsthand, the damage was astounding.
I think that sometimes it's easy to think the news kind of cherry picks views of damage. Like they'll show you the same block of impacted area. That's not the case here. There's tree damage everywhere, trees down everywhere, and that's going to affect a lot of our rivers kind of across the area. But wow, the river corridors are just so impacted by this hurricane. The rivers were so high. And, really what you see is a lot of the more low gradient natural areas they fared pretty well, especially if they're upstream of towns. But certain rivers just got so much rain, like the Swannanoa, Big Hungary, the Green, that they're just, forever altered. The amount of industrial debris and trash, and I mean, you call it trash, but it's really just people's lives, that their physical belongings and a lot of businesses' belongings are just scattered all along the rivers up 25 feet. Like we did a cleanup on the French Broad the other day, and like no one thought to bring a ladder, but the trash and the debris is so high up in the trees you can't reach it without like a pretty good ladder, like not even a step ladder, but like a ladder.
Many communities in the Appalachian Mountains have experienced horrific flood disasters. But the thing that really sets this one apart is the enormous geographic area that was involved. The closest thing I can think of in comparison was the 1985 Election Day flood in Virginia and West Virginia. In that event, Hurricane 1 parked over the mountains and dropped over 19 inches of rain over the headwater streams of the James, the Potomac, and the Cheat River basins. The Cheat River seemed to be one of the hardest hit. It rose to an estimated flow of 250,000 CFS, destroying the river towns of Parsons, Rollsburg, and Albright, and completely rearranging the stream beds of the Cheat Canyon and its multiple tributaries. This flood was very similar, but on an even greater scale. Over 30 inches of rain struck the highest mountain ridge in the southeastern United States, with devastating impacts on at least 5 major river watersheds, and unfortunately including several large population centers.
So you can kind of think of it, for folks that know the area, the swath of kind of profound change on our rivers is from like Big Creek and the Pigeon to the west, and then as you go east to Wilson Creek. That seems to be the kind of 120 mile swath of profound change. So, rivers, the Green is profoundly altered because it had so much stream power and so much water that the Green Narrows is wildly altered. The Rocky Broad through Chimney Rock is basically going to be a man-made river now, because it reclaimed the whole valley and took out the town of Chimney Rock by and large. And now there's excavators putting the river back where it used to be, but it won't look anything like what it did before. And then there's rivers like the French Broad and the Noli, the Watauga and the Pigeon that have just been totally reshaped. So every rapid that you knew before, it will be different. Doesn't necessarily mean they're better or worse. The early reports are that those rivers in particular are maybe like a half grade harder or maybe a bit more, which could be from lack of familiarity, but probably there's legitimate like changes in difficulty, but not necessarily bad, just profoundly different. And then probably the other thing is, the railroads and the road system, they're all in the rivers. So anywhere that there's a railroad along the river, the rivers, which is like the Noli, the Tow, the Cane, the French Broad, the rivers had severe impacts on railroads. And then everywhere there's a river, the roads are, washed out pretty much, the real proximal roads. So, that's led to just a ton of industrial debris in the rivers as well. So, you kind of end up with just this mix of, altered rivers, impacted infrastructure, and pollution from the wastewater treatment plants being damaged. And then there's just the obviously the cultural aspect of it and the personal, like human aspect of it, of these communities that have been so radically impacted, with loss of life and loss of community centers and houses and property, and pretty epic.
Considering the sensitivity of the hardest hit river communities, I asked Kevin about his perspective on returning to these rivers for recreational river running.
Boy, that's a hard one. I've watched some of the online debates around that, and they've gotten pretty heated. With people with really valid perspectives on both sides. And I think I'll say one thing: like the paddling community has really showed up to the communities where we paddle, and that's I'm really proud of our community for that. Like I feel like we really reached out to these little rural towns that we drive through all the time when we go boating, and maybe we don't know the people there, but we're there bringing in relief supplies, and it's just been really cool. So I think from like the standpoint of being like compassionate neighbors and visitors, I think we're showing up, and that's really cool. So I wouldn't assume any ill will or anything, because a lot of us are up there, kind of in these outlying areas helping out. But I don't know. Certainly you can go to the Nantahala, like you can go to the Russell Fork, you can go to the Coe, the Chioa. There's lots of places that aren't that far away that were not impacted by the storm. And I think you can go to the Chattooga is another good example, that wasn't severely impacted. And, a lot of these rivers don't flow through communities, then you can go have your adventure in the woods. And I don't think that's, that's probably like the first place to go back to. The other thing to consider is, a lot of the access areas are gone. So, you go to these rivers and there's really nowhere to park. You don't want to be parking on somebody's property or, getting in the way of rescue vehicles or anything or traffic flow. So I'd say just like, be super careful about where you park if you do go to rivers so that you're not, kind of in the way. kind of upsetting people that are already upset. And we're going to work on that. I mean, that's one thing AW is going to be doing is, just trying to drive resources to get access areas built back, hopefully better than they were before as soon as possible. Like knowing how important a lot of the rivers here are just to communities and to economies and to individuals. That's going to be a major priority, I think. And a priority for the communities. They want us to come when they're ready, come back as tourists and visitors.
So I think it's pretty obvious that the rivers are going to offer some serious new hazards. And paddlers are going to need to be very heads up when getting back out there.
Every single thing, at least between Big Creek and Wilson Creek, which is a big span, is essentially a first descent at this point. So don't trust the gauges. Don't trust guidebooks. Don't trust, anything, any videos that you see. Like everything is really going to be exploratory for a while, and just take nothing for granted. You can't assume that rivers are the same level of difficulty. They might be 2 grades harder. Might be easier. You don't know. They're probably going to have a lot of hazards that are kind of weird. They're going to have industrial debris, wires, cables, kind of these sneaky industrial things that you just really need to be heads up about. They'll be probably more civvy for a while until smaller flows kind of fill in under some of the big rocks. And so, you really won't know where these hidden hazards are, that it takes our community, many, many years, sadly, to figure out where these hazards are, usually by accidents occurring or by scouting at low water. So just be super heads up that there's some unusual hazards. And, really, I think people should be, if you're not super confident at exploratory boating, you should let others go first. Really, that's what they do. They're used to moving as a group. They don't take anything for granted. They scout very judiciously, and they're really good at recognizing subtle hazards. Like these are the kind of skill sets that you really need. And also, help is further away than it used to be. With the road system being impacted, it used to maybe take someone, a rescue squad or someone, minutes to get somewhere, and now it might be hours. And they're stressed out and they're deployed different places. So I think the big thing is just be super cautious. And if exploratory boating with your team isn't your core competency, let someone else go first, and second and third and fourth, and learn from others.
In addition to the access issues and strainer hazards, there's also the question of what's in the water, and is it even safe to be around it or in it? Anna's group from Mountain True has been a longtime champion of water quality in the region, and they're trying to figure out what's in there now.
First off, there's debris, right? Like houses were swept into the river, cars, railroad tracks. I saw semis, I saw railroad cars. And especially that kind of stuff, cars will continue to leak oil and gas while they're in there. So that stuff is a little bit longer of a problem. We saw, those big above ground propane tanks people use for heating sometimes. Those are in the river, obviously leaking out whatever's in them. In terms of industry, they oftentimes store their stuff in drums or something. And if those did get swept into the river in places, and so that stuff leaches out. Sewage is definitely a concern. Septic systems can get overrun, and that stuff will leach out. Sewer systems can get overrun. We're lucky here in Asheville. The wastewater treatment plant never lost capacity. I think some of the stations, they had to use generators for a little while, but overall the plant is fine and has been up and running. The Spruce Pine wastewater treatment plant is done. It is not treating waste, but people can still flush, people are flushing their stuff, and so it's going directly into that river. And that's going to be a long-term recovery or recovery effort. And, actually we took an E. coli sample on the Nolichucky a couple days ago, and it's really low. So that's good, but long term for the people of Spruce Pine, the North Toe is actually fairly recreated up there. So we're going to have to figure out safe options for them going forward. But I think Henderson County, Mills River, and I haven't been down there to check, but I have not heard that they've had substantial damage. So, and we've taken a sample down by the airport, and it wasn't too high in terms of E. coli. So, we're obviously trying to do more follow-up and assessment as we're able to. But at the moment, in terms of sewage, I guess my bigger concerns are those communities where their wastewater treatment centers were impacted the most.
The wastewater treatment plant along the Pigeon River in Canton was also temporarily disabled immediately after the storm. But according to the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, is up and running now. Back in Spruce Pine, a community of several thousand people, they're estimating that it could take years to rebuild the treatment facility. In the meantime, they're trying to find temporary solutions. The latest update states that the pump stations were being pumped and hauled, presumably to neighboring counties' wastewater management facilities for treatment. And portable treatment facilities were expected to be set up within a week. Fortunately for paddlers, the Nolichucky Gorge has a very large drainage basin, so there should be plenty of dilution of any untreated water in the system. But it's something to keep an eye on. The water quality monitoring from organizations like Mountain True will be useful for paddlers to watch for the next few months as this situation unfolds. Mountain True has been monitoring the bacterial counts in these rivers for years, and it was reassuring to hear Anna's perspective on the recent test results.
To be honest, it's not as worrisome as I thought it would be. The French Broad specifically has kind of a bad reputation when it comes to E. coli. And these results are not they're not bad in my perspective. For us, everything is highly dependent on weather. So we see really high E. coli typically after rain events. These samples don't mimic that in terms of E. coli. These look more like a dry weather sample, which is what they are because it hasn't really rained since then. We'll see what happens the next time we get a big rain too, because stuff settles down in the sediment. A lot of it will flush downstream, but stuff can settle down. And then what happens when we have rain, the impact of the rain falling and then the runoff coming, from stormwater, all that can churn up the sediment within the water column, which can increase whatever's in the sediment, the levels of E. coli, or if there's other stuff in the sediment, that all gets churned back up. And so when we take a sample during a rain event, that's why we see elevated levels. And on top of that, all the stuff that's getting flushed into the waterways that's on the streets, or sometimes septic overflows, or sometimes sewer infrastructure can overflow in some of the weaker spots. So E. coli doesn't really like cold weather. We usually see E. coli levels drop in the winter. So it'll kind of depend on how hot or cold it is the next time it rains. But it'll be interesting to see regardless, I think.
This event flushed some hazardous chemicals into the water, which is not surprising considering some of the destroyed industrial facilities along the river. On one of the first days after the flood, standing on a bridge over the river, I remember watching a huge oil sheen floating down the middle of the channel. Of course, this was flushed out and well diluted by the huge volume of water heading downstream. As of October 25th, the EPA reported recovering over 1,000 displaced containers of hazardous materials such as oil and propane. There was some suspicion that the sediment deposited along the riverbanks might contain some of these hazardous chemicals in it. Mountain True and some of the government agencies involved have been testing these sediments.
So we just did our first kind of basin-wide sampling event this week. We kind of just picked population centers and went from there. So so we can do E. coli in our own lab, but we have to send out for like metal, doing heavy metal sampling and sediment sampling. And so we've sent those off. Before that, we did do sampling around Marshall, downstream of Woodfin, because there's concern of there's a PVC pipe manufacturer, and we didn't know if their chemicals ended up in the waterway or not. So we did do some sediment sampling around that. Really, we're looking for like stuff you would see like diesel, gasoline, benzene, dioxin sometimes. Anything that you could think of that might come from an industry or, overrun with petroleum type products.
Along with Mountain True, there are governmental organizations keeping track of these issues as well.
I know EPA is involved specifically with the Silverline Plastics facility based in Woodfin. And the state and EPA can oftentimes work hand in hand. So they're all out. And in North Carolina, our environmental department is called the Department of Environmental Quality. And they have a really good map that they've created that kind of pinpoints some of the critical areas of pollution influx from the hurricane. So like where propane tanks have been found, or like overturned railroad cars and stuff like that. So they're keeping track. They can't be everywhere all the time. And so when we find stuff, we'll send it to them. We do work. They're good partners to work with.
The online map that Anna mentioned is a great resource if you're interested in finding out more information about point sources of pollution in these watersheds. It shows updated information about wastewater treatment infrastructure, any unusual leaks or spills, hazardous containers, and other issues that might have an impact on the water quality. If you happen to be paddling in the region and notice any suspicious environmental issue, such as a leaking container or something that has an unusual smell or oil sheen, you should report this directly to the Department of Environmental Quality or to Mountain True. I will have all of the contact info for these places listed on our Facebook site, The Safety Break. Identifying these problems is just one of the many ways that paddlers can help in the cleanup of the region. And while the map project mentioned above from the Department of Environmental Quality is mostly focused on chemical and wastewater in the rivers, Kevin also thought about a similar idea for flagging some of the larger industrial debris that we're seeing in the rivers.
I'm actually thinking, talking to a couple different people about developing an app for like a GIS app for paddlers to mark industrial debris that like needs removed. Because there's going to be a lot of stuff, this flood, it moved houses and storage containers and like things that like a normal river cleanup can't touch, So I'm going to try to figure out a good way to like flag things that are bigger than like a John boat could get or a raft. And then, try to work on getting stuff out of those rivers while folks are mobilized.
We're going to have to rely on some of this government and industrial help to get these bigger problems solved. But paddlers can play a huge role in river cleanups as well. It's going to be a long-term need in the region.
There's going to be lots of stream cleanups. Mountain True is actually doing a great job. They've already organized one or two. I participated in one of them. They're great at like field organizing. So they've got a couple on the books now. I do think that's a really helpful role people can play. It's just, and that's going to be a long game.
We did a land-based cleanup. We'll do plenty more. We have a couple next week. But we want to focus on, places people can go to for mental health too, So like we focused on the River Arts District. That place was a zoo before this hurricane hit. And I just feel like once that gets clean and people can start running and walking that, or at least what's left of the Greenway, that is a huge benefit to the community. I miss it, So like, I think opening those places back up will be really, it's really important.
I think continuing to support the communities, like the people impacted by this flood and the hurricane, I think that's really important too. Like people matter, and we know that more than ever after a disaster like this. So There's a great group out of the French Broad River Academy that's organizing relief efforts. And, and those efforts, I think, are evolving from needing stuff and needing like lots of water and things like that. Like I think now it's evolved to more like people are in for the long haul of rebuilding and getting through winter and staying connected. Helping people through existing networks. River cleanups are going to be the long haul. Engaging politically and engaging in your community around river access. Our use of rivers is not necessarily going to be top of mind for people as they rebuild, unless we collectively show up. And there's not going to be one conversation that like American Whitewater can participate in. There's going to be 100 conversations or 200 in every community that we just need civic engagement from folks. And you can always reach out to your congressmen and, senators too, and just, voice your concerns. Like there's a lot of people trying to figure out what's most important right now. And if something that's really important to you, like this is a political process as well. There's going to be a lot of money that gets dedicated to this cleanup. If you have good ideas about your community, if you're listening and you're just like, wow, I always wish that like that river access area was built differently, or, I see this thing in the river that I just really hope, I don't think other people are going to get, but it's a priority. It's a great opportunity to engage, both politically and also just, keeping your eyes open for whether it's workers on site or planning efforts or public meetings. It's going to be a really important time to engage, to get the communities back and the rivers back that we want, not just the ones we had before.
So after my interview with Anna, and just before releasing this episode, the initial sediment sample results from the Marshall site were published. Marshall is a small river town downstream of Asheville, and just upstream of French Broad Section 9, probably the most interesting section of that river for whitewater paddlers. The samples were taken in sediments deposited near the river. These fortunately only showed a couple of significant chemicals, isopropyl toluene and trimethylbenzene, and both in relatively low concentrations. Of these two, the trimethylbenzene seems to have the most potential for harm. But again, the level was low enough that it's not likely to have much of an impact on casual river users. If you anticipate having more significant contact, such as a cleanup operation or something like that, where you're really getting into the riverside sediment, then personal protective equipment might be something to consider. In general, exposure to significant concentrations of these products can cause skin and eye irritation, breathing issues, and GI upset such as nausea or diarrhea, and it can cause long-term effects on the nervous system. It seems very unlikely at this point, however, and the evidence so far suggests that there is really not enough of this stuff in the river waters to cause much harm with the type of exposure expected from whitewater paddling, and is probably more of a concern to those that live or farm along the river. Of course, everyone will have to make their own risk assessment and decisions, but we are fortunate to have our own natural chemical analysis systems in our noses and eyes. If the water looks and smells clean, there's a good chance that it is, and vice versa. If you have any concerns, trying to keep your boat upright, avoid plow boating or rolling, or just staying off the water if you're really risk averse. For me, I'll probably avoid the next big rain surge that comes through, and give things a few days to settle out again before paddling some of the sections that are downstream of major population centers. And I'll also be watching for the bacterial count reports from Mountain True or other agencies. There are a few other infectious diseases that can occur after exposure to floodwaters. This includes things like Legionnaire's disease, leptospirosis, wound infections, and various types of infectious diarrhea. These are all relatively unlikely, but if you have an unexplained febrile illness after being exposed to these waters, be sure to mention your exposure to your healthcare provider to help them consider some of those possibilities. The last health issue that's worth mentioning here, and maybe one of the most important, is mental health. This disaster has caused a huge disruption of daily life here and displaced thousands of people. When eventually added up, the numbers of lost jobs or lost income is going to be staggering. And if that wasn't enough, many of the places on the rivers and creeks that we go to seek solace from these problems have been forever altered. For many of us in the paddling community, our whole sense of self is deeply rooted in the outdoor environment and the community that surrounds it here. So let's all try to recognize the potential mental health impacts here and try to get ahead of this issue. Social isolation plays a huge role in this problem, and one simple way to help is just to keep checking on your neighbors and friends. Invite someone you know to a river or trail cleanup or some other volunteer effort. If you're not ready to get back on the whitewater streams, take a day with some friends to explore one of the other easier sections of the river upstream of town, and check out all of the crazy high water lines and new river features. We've all got to watch out for each other here. There are multiple resources online, and there is a disaster distress helpline for crisis counseling available 24 hours a day. The number is 1-800-985-5990. Please reach out for help if you need it. If you're listening to this before the first weekend of November and you want to get outside and feel good, let's all get out there and help the Green Race crew with the river cleanup on Saturday. They've got a big event there to celebrate the recovery efforts in the Green River Cove, and the late shifters kicking it into high gear with some music that evening. Hope to see everyone there. Many thanks to Kevin Colburn from American Whitewater and Anna Alsobrook from Mountain True, and all the other volunteers that are trying to put this place back together. You can see the progress in the region every single day. Thanks for listening today, and here's Kevin Colburn with the last word.
But I guess I'll just finish by saying, thank you to everyone who's chipping in and helping out and trying to help this region land on its feet and help its people, help the rivers. It's been great to see how folks have organized and rallied, and the individuals, just individual people doing really cool work. It's been really, really inspirational.
Thank you for listening to The Safety Break, the Whitewater Rescue Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button and click follow on our Facebook page so that we know that you're out there. I'm also looking for more stories. If you know of an interesting non-fatal river accident or rescue, send me a few details by email, safetybreak@gmail.com. It doesn't have to be dramatic or life-threatening, just something that we all might be able to learn from. I'll see if we can turn it into an episode. Stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the river.